For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started. For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.
What is low and high? Like, where are you getting this from? Why do you assume that we have low genetic diversity? Maybe it's extremely high. Maybe it's incredibly high for the species that we are.
Well, for any two humans on Earth, so whether it's somebody from, say, Asia or somebody from North America, do you know how different they would be?
How is this evidence for Adam and Eve?
Because low genetic diversity is exactly what we'd expect given a special creation of two people. That's why the Bible predicted this. We've always predicted
low genetic diversity could exist for 100 different reasons.
The reason that the evolutionists give is not remote. So it remains in the realm of pseudoscience. That's the thing. Okay, I want to hear you comment on the chart that I gave regarding mitochondrial DNA and the fact that these lines, these mitochondrial DNA differences, they divide into three major groups designated L, M, and N. How is that not compelling to you, since that's exactly what we predict based on post-flood humanity and repopulation by three women, Noah's three daughters-in-law, and yet we see three major haplogroups that point us right back to Noah's three daughters-in-law. How come that's not compelling to somebody like yourself? Because it was compelling to me. So what, where's the difference there?
Well, just the fact that the mitochondrial DNA split into three different offshoots and Noah happened to have three different daughters. It could be coincidence. We need some more evidence. We need to substantiate that quite a bit more. I thought we were going to be talking about, writings of Noah or evidence of where the actual ark, or I don't know, what scientific evidence do we have for any of these characters?
See, here's the thing. The Bible in and of itself is a historical document. It's a documentary evidence. Now, I understand
some of it's historical, not all of it.
I'm using the historical account as a non-ad hoc explanation by making predictions, retrodictions that flow from it. If it wasn't flowing, like, for example, your answer to the three major haplogroups was what? It could be a coincidence. Well, the thing is, that's what you have to resort to is, yes, it's a coincidence. But the fact that there are three major haplogroups of human mitochondrial DNA in the world is amazing confirmation of the model. It's consistent. It's what we predicted. And then you have to say, well,
why
maybe
couldn't it have been just a tribe that was separated, a tribe that broke up because they didn't like each other anymore and went and lived far enough away that they didn't actually interact anymore?
And this would explain three major haplogroups that are joined by relatively short line segments. Sure. Indicating that there's not much difference between them. That, once again, is ad hoc. Because can you make any predictions based on that? Because I gave you some predictions that this mitochondrial DNA map can actually make.
Well, I'm just throwing out a hypothesis that would fit the facts just as well as your hypothesis.
Right. But if it's a hypothesis that doesn't actually make testable and falsifiable predictions, well, then it's a failed hypothesis, right?
Well, if it's a hypothesis without any evidence, it's a failed hypothesis. But you haven't presented any evidence for your hypothesis either. So we're both in the same boat.
No, because I showed you on this diagram, on this mitochondrial phylogenetic map, there were subnodes. I talked about how these subnodes make testable predictions. Because if we came from these three nodes.
What are the testable predictions?
Okay, so if we come from these three nodes, okay, and the DNA differences are all a marker of time, as I explained in my opening, what we're looking at here with the radiating out from the three nodes are post-flood times, or in other words, the history of civilization. So what should we be able to predict? Well, we should be able to read the history of civilization from this tree. Romans, Greeks, Persians, because the tips of this tree, they're individuals. And these testable predictions are actually coming true. Not only that, the African lines, mutation rates, and predictions on mutation rates, for example, the Khoisan peoples, have been made by creation scientists. Now, how come they're making the testable predictions?
None of this is making any sense, okay?
Kent typing, or is his producer getting butt mad in our chat?
You guys have a fascination with the hind end, don't you? The flies are attracted to the cows, you know.
They're attracted to their butthole.
Next one.
You are really, really fascinated with that, aren't you? Most of the people watching this are realizing when you resort to ad hominem or laughter, this is a sure sign you're losing and you know it. But that's okay. Go ahead.
Yes, it's just really
How
funny.
many people think you're sign they're losing? Okay.
Next up.
It's.
How many are enjoying this? How many think the evolutionists have blind faith in something that's extremely stupid?
I hate interrupting.
Did your brain have a designer?
No.
No. I believe you. Go ahead.
Worn out places, worn out faces, bright and early for their daily races, going.
You guys can imagine anything you want. Go ahead. Richard, anytime. I'll debate you anytime. And you can show with all your accredited degrees how dumb I am for not having an accredited degree. So y'all folks, everybody in England over there, tell Uncle Richard that I will debate him any day of the week on the evolution topic. I will pay him $500 to debate me for 2 hours. I may need to borrow the $500 from somebody, but I think I got $30 $12 left. Okay. I will pay to have it filmed and give him a master copy, and either of us may sell it with no royalties to the other side. He could make millions debunking me. Richard, call me, 855-BIG-DINO, extension 3, anytime, okay? People say, Hovind, you like mocking these guys? I love it. Is it okay to mock people for believing something extremely stupid? I don't know if Elijah asked God if this was okay or not. I have never asked him if it's okay or not because I enjoy it. And I intend to continue, okay? You guys always accuse me of lying when you're the ones that are not only lying, you're stupid. You guys hide in your mother's basement with your keyboard warrior, you know. And any of you students having a hard time in your class, I'll do a Skype interview in front of your entire school or your public school teacher, or schedule a debate. I don't have to travel anywhere. I can sit here in Lenox, Alabama and do a debate by Skype. Please, count me in. Please do that, okay? And if they won't, send me their name of who declined, and we'll tell everybody about it. Send me your picture and a picture of them. Hey, did you know this teacher teaches this evolution in this? I'll name the school and everything. I'll give the school board names and addresses, because the school board ought to fire that teacher. Yeah. They're indoctrinating the students. They're not educating them. Tell your friends about our channel. And if you got any atheist friends that you'd like us to make fun of, send us what they believe. We'll be glad to do that. Is there more, Steve? All right, thank you. Bye.
Mammals will always produce mammals, right? Vertebrate will always produce vertebrates. Chordata will always produce chordata. Whatever you are, it's called a nested hierarchy. So bacteria went one way, the prokaryotes, we're eukaryotic. So here's a eukaryotic group that had evolution. We stemmed from that. Okay, a bacteria can never produce a human. It can never produce anything that's eukaryotic because we're on a different line of phylogeny, different branch.
Bacteria to biologist. Evolutionists believe that bacteria can never become anything outside of that domain, and they are right. This cannot happen, nor has it ever happened. Yet, at the same time, they also claim and teach that it did happen, long ago and far away. So, we know today that the domain bacteria belong only to bacteria. They cannot change domains in any experiment, nor any that has ever been seen. Yet, they expect us to believe that this did happen, because they need this to happen for their theory to work. They swear that complex eukaryotic cells ushered in a whole new era of life on Earth, which all came from bacteria. So, when they tell you, no, we don't think humans evolved from bacteria, they don't know what they're talking about.
So, from the beginning, life went in 3 different directions, and these are called domains. A domain is one level up from a kingdom in terms of classification. And we've got the well-known bacteria domain. But what we're mostly concerned with here is the eukaryote domain. And the word eukaryote means true cell. And what happened was a process called endosymbiosis, where various type of bacteria combined together. One cell went into another cell to create a more complex cell with.
They don't know what they're talking about. They do believe that because that is what the theory teaches. Originally, the bacteria had to swap domains and become a eukaryote, which later evolved into humans. How? Well, they tell us that these cyanobacteria evolved into multicellular organisms by either accidental mutations or some other unknown random process. I'll describe one of these dumb scenarios in a minute. But how did the eukaryotic cell itself evolve, and how did a worthless single-cell bacteria without any thought make this evolutionary leap from a single cell in the bacteria domain to a more complex cell in the eukaryote domain? They have no clue at all, just random speculation and pure imagination. One guess is that the eukaryotic cell ate a free-living bacterium that had mitochondrial, which may have ended up staying as some sort of permanent house guest, which might have changed this cyanobacteria into eukaryotic. So they believe the cyanobacteria evolved into a single lineage into an entirely different domain through a process called endosymbiosis. No actual observable, testable, or repeatable science exists whatsoever for any of this, at any level. But don't worry, they will show you lines on paper that will explain it all. And don't forget, it's a scientific fact, and true until proven otherwise. So yes, they do believe that we evolved from bacteria, an entirely different domain than eukaryotes. Exactly the opposite of what they try to tell you in debates.
Okay, a bacteria can never produce a human.
No matter what they try to say, they do believe that these bacteria went through endosymbiosis and moved from the bacteria domain into the eukaryote domain. Oh, and this was all supposed to have happened 3.5 to 3.8 billion years ago. And never again, not even today, no matter how much they are forced to in laboratories.
Today we're going to look at evolution and the history of life on Earth. We're going to trace the evolutionary journey from the earliest single-celled organisms all the way up to modern humans, step by step. So let's start here at the bottom. The most simple type of life, a single cell, came to exist about 4 billion years ago. And we don't know exactly why or how.
Mammals will always produce mammals, right? Vertebrate will always produce vertebrates. Chordata will always produce chordata. Whatever you are, it's called a nested hierarchy. So bacteria went one way, the prokaryotes, we're eukaryotic. So here's a eukaryotic group that had evolution. We stemmed from that. Okay, a bacteria can never produce a human. It can never produce anything that's eukaryotic because we're on a different line of phylogeny, different branch.
The evolutionary tree of life, bacteria, man, whales and pine trees, all related through common ancestry. And yet what we see is that things are going down and not up. We observe devolution. Geneticists can see that it is a fact that mankind is degenerating and that forward evolution is not feasible. Deleterious. Bad mutations are accumulating faster than they are being selected away. This means that the human genome, as I've stated, is degenerating. Mutations in natural selection, evolutionists look to as mechanisms that are going to take their bacteria-like organisms into whales. Some evolutionists even deny this, as you can see here with Steve McRae. They're so embarrassed of their science fiction-based religion. At the end of the day, they'll claim that the earth was one time ruled by single-celled, bacteria-like organisms. And yet, what do we see today? Observable evidence tells us that dogs produce dogs, Bacteria produce bacteria, and whales produce whales. Yet they'll say that whales, bacteria, and man are all related through common ancestry. They'll look to nested hierarchies, but we do not see forward evolution. Mutations, for example, random changes in the genome or in the instruction manual of life, are almost always deleterious and will systematically destroy essential information. We see adaptive degeneration. We see that things are breaking. Devolution is being observed. These mechanisms work by breaking down genes. And that means evolution, sure, it can help species and organisms to change, to be different, to adapt. This is only surface level though, because it doesn't have the ability to build or create anything new or novel at the genetic level. Evolution falls short, and that means that it is impossible for a bacteria-like organism to change through incremental steps and stages into something as complex as a whale or a human being. It is science fiction religion at its finest. Picture a car. You want to get better gas mileage on this car, so you start throwing things away. Throw off the doors. The car is lighter. You get better gas mileage, but it's through breaking things, and it's long-term problems, long-term degeneration. We can see this in the famous long-term evolution experiment that deals with bacteria, that has proven that bacteria produces bacteria. Remarkably, in this experiment, all, or maybe essentially all, I'll give the evolutionists a few, but these adaptive mutations, they were reductive in nature. And at the end of the day, these bacteria, they're lazy, they're handicapped, and it's very significant that the few documented adaptive mutations in this long-term experiment were shown to be reductive in nature. In other words, involving the loss of function or loss of regulation. It's also very significant that the genomes of most of these E. coli populations actually shrank physically. It's ongoing genetic degeneration. There is no, as I've said before, there is no forward evolution. It only happens in the imagination of those evolutionists that want to believe in it so badly. And this famous evolution experiment ever conducted involving bacteria that is being proclaimed by some to the world as dramatic proof, amazing proof, they'll say, of observable evolution, is actually one of the most powerful and greatest demonstrations of genetic entropy and devolution. This is all consistent with the fact that bacteria-like organisms produce bacteria-like organisms. Yet these evolutionists like Steve McRae here believe that a bacteria-like organism can turn into something non-bacteria. Nobody's ever seen it. The law of monophyly, we can never outgrow our ancestry. Yes, that's exactly what we would predict based on the biblical creation model of origins. God created original created kinds, and they've adapted. They've changed through whatever means, but they've never outgrown their ancestry. That means a bacteria and a whale, contradictory to those evolutionists with such strong imaginations, are not related.
Kind of like a mosquito. You gotta just once in a while, you gotta swat them. Wow.
When I heard hydraulic sorting for the first time, I just about lost it.
Okay, go ask your mama to explain it to you. Okay, it's not hard. I'm a teacher. I'll help you learn, okay? Why does this do this? Oh, we forgot the fan. Oh, I'm sorry, Aaron. I'm sorry. Here, turn the fan on there. Okay. Is it working? Do I look more intelligent? Hydrologic sorting. Animals are already automatically sorted based upon their body density. They're based on, animals during the flood would be sorted based upon habitat, for one thing. You know why the clams are usually found at the bottom of the geologic column? They're already at the bottom when the flood starts. That's where they live, okay? So they're the first ones buried. They live at the bottom. I mean, mud flow is going around, clams get buried, first thing. Later we dig them up, find, the clams are at the bottom. Oh, yeah. They must have evolved first. No. They drown first. Clams can drown, you know. Secondly, they're going to be sorted based upon their intelligence. As far as anybody's been able to tell from the IQ tests that have been passed around, clams aren't too bright. When something changes in their environment, you know, temperature change, like maybe the fountains of the deep broke open and hot stuff came out from inside the earth, they clam up. That's their response to disaster, clam up. So it might be based upon intelligence. They didn't know. Birds would be a little smarter than clams, and they might figure out a way to avoid drowning until longer. Thirdly, they might be based upon mobility. As far as we know, clams can't run very fast, not near as fast as a bird can fly. So maybe the sorting has to do something with the mobility of the creatures, or maybe just simply their body density. Now you guys very mistakenly or ignorantly called it weight. There's nothing to do with weight. Density is very different. I think we need the fan again just for a second here. Listen, just to review here now before we leave class, okay? Weight is not the same as density or specific gravity. Birds have a lower specific gravity than T-Rexes. Reptiles have a higher density than birds. The size doesn't matter, the weight doesn't matter, it's the density and the specific gravity, very, very similar terms. You understand? If any questions, stay after class, I'll be glad to help you.
I should have known better.
Mary Schweitzer, you know, she discovered that a fossilized T-Rex femur had preserved bone marrow. Yes, she is a Christian, but she holds to an evolutionary worldview. So at the end of the day, he needs to answer the question as to how could soft, stretchy tissues be preserved in dinosaur remains that evolutionists claim are no younger than 65 million years old. Even in the best state of bone preservation, the soft inner parts should have completely rotted away. And yes, there are rescue devices. There has been no conclusive. There's a lot of guesswork. There's a lot of, you know, hypothesizing going on. But at the end of the day, if he admitted to this, to the obvious, that's going to call into question his entire evolutionary fairy tale and story. I want to hear how you explain, because I did ask you in my rebuttal, okay? Yeah. How could soft, stretchy tissue, and I'm going to give you ample time to answer the question, how could soft, stretchy tissues actually be preserved in dinosaur remains that evolutionists claim are no younger than 65 million years old? And I don't want you to give an answer like, oh, Mary Schweitzer was, you know, a devoted Christian. We all know she's...
No, well, then put a period to your sentence so I can answer you.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. The whole point is, as Schweitzer demonstrated in her technical paper about the processes, particularly involving iron, that can permit those sorts of things to occur, of which every single one of them is microscopically small in size. Almost all of the creationists that I've ever seen that have gone into this neglect to mention the scale of it. So that this is not something like Ötzi the Iceman, that's a well-preserved, massive body that's got all sorts of tissues intact. No, there are zero examples of that anywhere in the paleontological record. All of the stuff that Schweitzer has come up with, and for the same matter, Armitage's Triceratops horn,
I was going to ask you that one.
So, inside of steel containers. And they have been treated with a variety of chemical areas, which is questionable whether or not the conclusions are what he wants to be. It's one of the reasons why he was let go from his position, because he was just leaping beyond what the actual data field was. Now,
well,
I know
what Mary Schweitzer's explanation for how, like, is she suggesting that iron was able to act as a
Did
preservative?
you not, in all of these years, the paper I think came out 5 years ago, in all of this time, your curiosity has been so lame that you've never thought to look it up? It's available. It's, I think, in PNAS.
Of course I know that in 2005 is when Mary Schweitzer actually discovered this fossilized T-Rex femur, but as of lately, after that, I think it was in 2012 and so on, she has been doing work in regards
have you kept up with not only her papers on dinosaurs, but also on turtles and other soft tissue in those? Have you read those?
Well, for one, I'll answer that question, but at the end of the day, you're not really.
I just did answer the question that the material that is preserved is not giant masses of tissue. They are microscopic particles that are still found intact, buried inside of bones, in contexts in which it is not at all implausible that they could have survived for 100 million years, let alone.
Is that biofilm you're talking about? The microorganisms who?
No, read her bloody papers.
Well, from what I've seen, that those types of claims have not actually withstood.
That's the problem from what you've seen, and it seems as though, Standing, you don't look very far.
Is it not true that on Letters to a Creationist, who, you know, a lot of evolutionists look to you know, attempt to refute Dr. John Sanford, didn't he say in one of his blogs or one of his writings there that there hasn't been an actual, yes, there has been these suggestions here, there has been, you know, this explanation there, but nothing has actually been conclusive in explaining away these observations? Or are you saying that it is now conclusive that or is this just is it more than just storytelling, I guess?
I'll stand on the fact that none of her recent work, which is collaborative, it's not just her, has gotten any a pushback from the regular scientific community. When her findings were put out originally back in the 1990s, there was some quite legitimate skepticism that these might have been due to contamination.
1 minute
and
left.
the work, yeah, 1 minute left. The work eventually got more and more out, and that has obliterated. Now, you would think that if these supposedly blinded evolutionists with their millions of years really thought that this was a problem for their model, that they would be going after this tooth and tongue, but nobody is disputing.
Well, no, because they have that primary assumption that universal common ancestry is true, so everything has to be force-fitted into that
No,
paradigm.
it's not an assumption, it's an observation.
As creationists, well, obviously evolutionary scientists and you know, you're not going to be willing, due to that basic assumption and worldview, to actually consider or conclude what I think is a very reasonable possibility that dinosaurs have lived recently and coexisted with man. I've shown you paintings, mosaics, I've shown you historical accounts, I've shown you data here in regards to soft dinosaur tissue.
Yeah, even I know.
Haven't scientists even discovered and detected intact DNA from so-called ancient dinosaur bones?
Brian Stevens says Mary Schweitzer found
Schweitzer.
Thank you. Found the standing for truth tissue disagrees with soft tissue disagrees with standing for truth. Thanks for that super chat.
Remember, I've got in the link. If anybody follows up through that a bit, they'll be able to see the technical references from Proceedings in the National Academy of Sciences. You can find it that way, and therefore it's free, open access. Nobody has to take either one of our word for it. They can read the original.
Gotcha.
Well, and I just want to say that you can go look at on my channel some of the videos that Rob, Matt, and myself have made. You know, we talk about how, yes, Mary Schweitzer suggested that iron was able to act as a preservative over millions of years, and she says it's by cross-linking the soft tissue proteins to preserve its structural integrity. But it's only been shown that hemoglobin can be preserved for up to 2 years, and even this is highly concentrated iron solution that would not actually be expected to be found in the natural environment of the fossil. So like I said earlier, rescue device is storytelling. Mary Schweitzer, just like R.J. Downer, they have to hold the revolutionary
put that technical source up in the video description so everybody can track down on it, and we'll find out not the link to your video, but the technical source that you claim.
You can go look at the source itself, but it's not holding up to scrutiny.
In the early 90s, researchers from Montana State University made an amazing discovery. Inspecting a piece of T-Rex bone under a microscope, they could hardly believe their eyes. They could see dinosaur red blood cells. This discovery prompted lead scientist Mary Schweitzer to say, "It is exactly like looking at a slice of modern bone, but of course I couldn't believe it." I said to the lab technician, "The bones, after all, are 65 million years old. How could blood cells survive that long?" In the A Discover magazine article, Dr. Schweitzer explained further her response. "If you take blood cell samples and you stick them on the shelf, you have nothing recognizable in about a week. Why would there be anything left in dinosaurs? Well, the only reason there would be anything left in dinosaurs comes down to there being iron in the blood. However, this excuse falls short, as you are about to see. But first, let's touch on two other reasons that this cannot happen. As I am explaining these two other major problems with why dinosaur bones cannot be 65 million years old, look at all the findings of soft tissue discovered recently and how they know to look for it now, rather than just assume it doesn't exist at all. Problem number one, the mostly left-handed amino acids that should be equally right-handed and left-handed if they were Jurassic. They are not there. The laws of chemistry demonstrate that after death, amino acids go back to a 50-50 mixture of right and left-handed amino acids. The England's Royal Society published a time range for when this physical process to occur, which produces totally racemized amino acid in 100,000 to 1 million years maximum. So, obviously, that is not even close to 65 million years old. Another problem, the amino acid methionine is very susceptible to strong oxidizing agents like hydrosol, which would quickly oxidize methionine into methionine sulfoxide. The Nature Communication study results revealed unoxidized methionine in some of the Alberta dinosaur specimens. Also consider this. The research on the Egyptian mummies has established a 10,000-year upper limit for how long biological molecules can survive. Now, back to iron for just a moment. If you want to see the rescuing device for iron preservation fail in real time, it's easy. Just look for yourself. One of the most striking examples of soft tissue preservation in dinosaur fossils. If you look at the photos in the paper, you see no evidence of iron particles. The only place she saw iron was inside partially degraded tissue. You see, iron in blood, which gets released at death, cannot preserve all soft tissue decay for millions of years because it still degrades collagen proteins, which have also been found in some specimens. So while iron might preserve some soft tissue, it obviously is not responsible for all soft tissue preservation. Also consider that iron would be incapable of preserving soft dinosaur tissue if it could actually distribute it from the dinosaur's blood throughout all the tissue. Of course, Mary Schweitzer and her team totally submerged specimens to preserve them to obtain the results they desired. But the only way to accomplish this naturally is distributed by water. Well, guess what? That brings up another huge problem, as water also degrades soft tissue before iron can preserve it. In addition to this, soft tissue has also been found in bones not directly associated with iron-rich blood, like in the bone horn of the Triceratops and bird feathers. More problems with iron preservation with microbiologist Kevin Anderson later in this video. The old Earth idea was developed historically, not from letting the physical facts speak for themselves, but by imposing anti-biblical philosophical assumptions onto their geological observations, the idea driving the conclusion.
At the end of the day, yes, he does have rescue devices and stories for all of this, including the soft tissue in dinosaur bones. I mean, the discovery of soft tissues in dinosaur bones has actually become very much common and fairly common even among different dinosaur species. And he brought up the analysis of the Triceratops horn, and it contained original bones, soft tissue, and I think it even had, complete and very well preserved bone building cells, which are called osteocytes. So at the end of the day, he can try explaining all this away within our worldview, within the biblical based model. It all fits perfectly like a glove. The name of the debate, the title of the debate was, can man and dinosaur have coexisted? And I think I've provided more than enough evidence that they did, and evidence that they certainly could.
The big push at the moment is to explain it away, to come up with some explanation of how the tissue survived. There are several ideas out there. The most popular one at the moment is the one that Mary Schweitzer herself has proposed, where she proposed that In red blood cells, you have hemoglobin, which of course is composed of iron, which is what then attracts and binds the oxygen, so that the hemoglobin in the red blood cell can transport the oxygen around in the body. Okay, what she's proposed is that upon the death of the animal, the red blood cells ruptured and they released the hemoglobin, which released the iron. In biological systems, iron can catalyze what's called a Fenton reaction. And this reaction, in essence, just causes proteins, for example, to cross-link. So it causes reactions of the proteins so that they actually become more resistant. So in this cross-link state, microbes don't degrade them as fast, enzymes don't degrade them as fast, they just simply don't compose as fast. And so she's proposed that that then explains how they could have lasted millions of years. We reject what she's at least proposed so far because we would say, first off, Fenton reactions are also going to leave signatures. They're going to leave signatures in how they're going to change the chemical state of certain amino acids. And in the protein analysis that's been done of like the collagen, for example, those amino acids in that protein don't have that altered chemical state that you would expect from a Fenton reaction. See, so we're not seeing the footprints that we would expect to see if these reactions were actually causing these massive changes to the proteins that were causing them to be preserved better. We would also say that the models themselves that have been studied take some of this into account. You know, the collagen models, they take into account some of the physical changes that are going to occur to collagen that you would say may make it more resistant to degradation. And yet the studies show that it still doesn't last tens of millions of years. So there is no physical chemical evidence that's going to support the idea that proteins, any protein, is going to be able to last tens of millions of years. It's just strictly an extrapolation. It must last because we know these are old. And there becomes your conundrum. Again, the paradigm driving the conclusion. We also would challenge that the study that Dr. Schweitzer did, she used ostrich blood vessels. And she soaked them in water, soaked them in solutions of iron from hemoglobin, soaked them in various solutions, and then monitored their degradation, how fast they degrade. And she reported that after 2 years, those that were exposed to the iron were, for the most part, undegraded. But first, 2 years at a steady temperature doesn't extrapolate to 65 million years at an unsteady temperature. Second, any technician can tell you that we take great pains in laboratories to preserve cells, to preserve protein, to preserve tissue. We freeze it. We deep freeze it. We freeze it, minus 200 degrees in liquid nitrogen. You don't leave it out. You don't expose it to water. You don't expose it to all the things that, in all honesty, these fossils tended to be exposed to because everybody knows that accelerates degradation.
You wouldn't expect that.
It certainly would not be your first prediction. Even from a creationist position, we know full well that these fossils are exposed to ground level radiation. In fact, you could take almost any dinosaur fossil and put a Geiger counter against it and it'll light it up because they've absorbed radiation. So even for 4,000 years, we say, wow, that's still quite a challenge to think they'd absorb radiation and still. So how are you going to explain 65 million years of exposure to this radiation? And Dr. Schweitzer's iron preservation model doesn't account for that.
So as a microbiologist, when you look at this, the two major paradigms that we have before us, and even though this is surprising, there is a paradigm between these two that better fits the evidence than the other.
I think we understand enough about the process and enough about tissue itself to recognize that the more clear, parsimonious, if you will, the simplest explanation is simply that the fossils aren't as old as they're being claimed to be. Dismiss the bacteria idea, you can dismiss the contamination idea. It is real dinosaur tissue, real dinosaur cells, and real dinosaur protein.
Okay, so once that is understood,
yes,
then what happens? Now this is shaking it up, I guess.
That becomes part of the controversy because clearly you're now faced with how could you explain the survival of this, the pristine survival of this, not only for so long, but in very unpristine conditions. There's nothing pristine about Hell Creek, Montana, for example. It's not permafrost. It's not like these were in a deep freeze for millions of years. Like we mentioned before, the temperature fluctuations, water. You know, water will degrade proteins. When we pulled the horn out of the ground, it had water underneath it just from the seepage of rainwater. That's why when we first dug the horn out, we thought, oh, there's nothing going to be in there. And there was. So these are not dry. They're not sealed in some kind of, you know, stainless steel vault. They're subjected to all kinds of conditions that would degrade this stuff. And so then the controversy has been, how do you explain it? And if you read some of the literature, there's almost like desperation of, would you guys please explain this? Because they recognized what the implications of this could be. Now, some people would claim, well, it means nothing because we know how old they are and therefore it just means it survived somehow, big deal. But how do you know how old they are? Well, you used methods, supposed methods of dating. Well, this is the method of dating. The tissue itself can't be discounted as part of a method of dating. So why do you say that doesn't count, but this does count? Well, it's all the paradigm drives your conclusions. The paradigm is it has to be old. Therefore, methods that give us an old fossil are what we choose. Something that doesn't give us an old fossil, like tissue, we have to reject or explain away.
So standing for truth then. Why go with genetic entropy since Kondrashov said that they'll go extinct in 100 generations?
Well, what Kondrashov said was, why are we not extinct 100 times over? Well, what's funny is that quote, because Kondrashov is an evolutionist. So he's asking and he's a population geneticist. That's why I always say population geneticists, evolutionary population geneticists agree that man is degenerating. And they say things like Kondrashov said, why are we not dead 100? Why are we not extinct 100 times over? That proves that the genome is young, and he can't, and all other population geneticists, they can't question their basic assumption of pond scum to people evolution, because they have to force fit all evidence, all data into that primary assumption. They're not going to question the theory, but we can look back and say, why are we not extinct 100 times over? That's because the genome is young. We haven't had enough time. That's why when you look at certain, deep lineage animals in the fossil record, and yet they remain unchanged, you see stasis. But based on what we know about genetics, based on what we know about genome degradation, that can't be possible. So, Joseph was talking about the fossil record, but the fossil record itself proves creation. Look at the coelacanth. I mean, millions and millions and millions of years ago, evolutionists say it went extinct. And all of a sudden, it pops up in the oceans today, just swimming around, never seen in the fossil record past a certain layer. Living fossils. There's a certain tree, Wollemi tree. I can't remember the exact name. I think that's what it is. Evolutionists said this is like finding a living dinosaur. And yet there it was, just hidden in plain sight. And it's funny because a tree can't run and hide like a living dinosaur could. Say, in the Congos with Mokele Medbay and stuff. We were having that debate the other day with RJ Downer. they can go hidden, yet this pine tree or this tree, Willemia pine, went undetected all this time, and yet there it is, another living fossil. So like I said, I mean, everything points to genetic degeneration and a biblical creation model. So I appreciate the question.
Time to debunk Tony Reed.
Next question is for Dr. Hoven. He asks, Tony Reed says the hydroplate theory has a heat problem. Is this true? And if so, how would it be solved?
That would take hours to explain. On my video series, I talk about Walt Brown's theory, which I think is correct. A hydroplate, meaning the crust of the earth is broken up into plates. And I think everybody agrees it is broken up into plates. And there's some are moving around the fault lines, etc. I taught Earth Science 15 years. We could talk all day on that if you'd like. Walt Brown says under about 10 miles of rock, there used to be a layer of water, which seems to be what the Bible teaches. And that broke forth and went shooting up to the top along these fault lines. And the plates of earth, huge trillions of pounds of plates of earth, slid on this water while it was escaping. Hydroplate. I think that's true. I think it's logical. It's much more logical than thinking all this massive earth was squeezed into a dot smaller than a period on a page. That's ridiculous. But I think the hydroplate theory, the movement of rock sliding on other rock would produce enormous amounts of heat. I agree. The water would provide one buffering force. The second buffering force, I'm very strongly in the camp of those who believe there was a canopy of ice above the atmosphere, probably 10 miles up. Anybody that's ever sprayed a can of hairspray or spray paint knows when you release pressure, it takes the heat away. It gets cold in your hand. So if the atmosphere was squeezed down to 10 miles and that broke open at the same time, the expanding atmosphere would absorb all that heat. So I think they balanced out. But again, I'm not asking for all that to be taught. I think there's a lot of research been done on the hydroplate theory. So far, I'm not aware of anything scientifically that has proven it incorrect. If you had something heating up the earth, like raining, latent heat of condensation when it rains, and you had an expanding atmosphere at the same time, it'd be a canceling effect.
And if you haven't already seen it, check out our flood video. Here is a short promo. And then, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month and the 17th day of the month, the fountains of the great deep broke forth. And the windows of heaven were opened.
those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.
More mutations can slip under the radar.
Are you disagreeing with, I'm sorry to interrupt. Are you disagreeing with the fact that bacterial genomes are more simple than, say, a human genome? I mean, you can just Google "are bacteria" or "what's the most simple life on Earth," and it's a bacteria. So it sounds like you're grasping at straws here in order to be able to imagine that, you know, losing information, the degradation of our genome is going to take your bacteria-like organism into something like a whale over time. I know you're not defending evolutionism here, but at the end of I just want to point something out because I think this is a straw man, because the central part of genetic entropy is that mutations, which are just spelling mistakes in the DNA, for example, they're accumulating so quickly in some creatures, say human beings, for example, that natural selection, it can't stop the functional degradation of the genome, let alone it's a double whammy because it can't obviously drive an evolutionary process that's going to turn your apes into people. So like I said, you still haven't rebutted the fact that they're simple genomes, high population sizes, short generation times, and lower overall mutation rates. A combination of those make bacteria the most resistant to genetic entropy. But yet we see, you can just check a multitude of papers, bacteria adapt by losing genes.
I feel like you're going off. I want to. So my debate style.
I want to hear about my points, man, because the name of the debate is, does bacteria disprove devolution? You're not doing too good here right now because it's a double whammy for us.
If I had $1 for every time an evolutionist used gene duplication as a rescue device and an answer to the key question regarding genetic degeneration or genetic entropy, I would be a rich man. The key issue when it comes to genomic degeneration is net gain versus net loss. And gene duplication is often used and cited as a viable mechanism for evolutionary advancement. And not only that, but as a means of generating new, novel, and meaningful information. Now, it is widely recognized that duplication, whether within a written text or within the living genome, absolutely destroys information. Now, don't get me wrong. Of course, rare exceptions may actually be found where, say, a duplication is beneficial, but this would only be in some minor way, possibly through some fine-tuning. But this in no way changes the fact that random duplications overwhelmingly destroy information. That means, contrary and contradictory to what the evolutionists would have you believe, duplications are just like the other types of mutations. If I were to give you a copy of a book that you already own, you have no new, novel, and meaningful information. Now, the evolutionists will say that second copy of the book that you already own will then experience typographical errors, spelling mistake, because that's exactly what a mutation is. And that will lead to the new information. But this only makes the problem worse when it comes to degeneration, because now all you have is a second copy of a book that you already own. Now, if you start introducing typographical errors in that second copy of the book that you already own, now you just have a more messed up copy of the original book. There's nothing new, novel, and meaningful. And even if, as a creationist, we were to give them, that is the evolutionist, a few rare beneficial duplications, those few rare beneficial duplications in no way will offset the damage done by the accumulating mutations, whether duplications or other types of mutations. This influx of deleterious mutations cannot be stopped. Let's take a certain gene that has been accumulating deleterious mutations over a long period of time. This specific gene is now in a partially degenerated state. Now, if we duplicate that gene, it should be evident to anybody that is not only the gene duplicated, the deleterious mutations are also duplicated with it. So the question becomes, does gene duplication actually answer the key issue of net gain versus net loss? Because does such a duplication, where the deleterious mutations are duplicated with it, in any way slow down the degeneration process? Obviously, the answer to this question is no. If you actually look at this carefully and inspect this type of change, you can actually see that this duplicate copy of this gene, both copies will now degenerate faster than before. The evolutionist will ask, well, why is that? The reason is because each would then have a backup copy and selection will become relaxed for both copies. The evolutionists say that after a gene duplication, one gene copy might then stay unchanged, while the other may then be free to evolve a new function. This is where they say the evolutionary advancement takes place. But is this actually feasible? Or is this all imagination? Because we do know that the evolutionists hope, dream, and imagine. Now, both copies will degenerate at approximately equal rates. And this is due to the accumulation of near neutral deleterious mutations. Neither can stay unchanged. As a matter of fact, gene conversion theoretically should be continuously cross-contaminating both the reputed unchanging copy and the reputed evolving copy. This means that gene conversions should also allow mutations within each gene to jump into the other copy, which should effectively increase the mutation rate for both copies. All of these facts clearly accelerate degeneration. That means that gene duplication is not the rescue device for the evolutionist. Duplicate genes clearly and evidently contribute to mutational degeneration. It actually accelerates degeneration. This is due to relaxed selection, as we've stated, and accelerated mutation accumulation. This is due to mutation scrambling through gene conversion. Now, the situation with gene duplication is even more complicated than this. If an organism appears with extra copies of, say, a specific gene, what's going to happen is that it may not be able to control the expression of that gene. And what's going to occur is an imbalance. And once again, this is all downhill and consistent with genetic entropy. This imbalance, though, it occurs in its physiology, decreasing its fitness. For examples, abnormalities such as Down syndrome is actually due to gene duplication. Since copy number is a type of information, and since copy number variations are known to occur, this is an example of a mutation that changes information. But does it actually add new, novel, and meaningful information? Of course not. Gene duplication, although there may be a rare few exceptions that are somewhat beneficial due to fine-tuning, when they actually do occur without damaging the organism, it's clearly not addressing the key issue, which is net gain versus net loss. Therefore, there is no way to stop genetic degeneration And there is no way that gene duplication can be used as a way to resolve this problem, nor can it be used honestly and intellectually to add new, novel, and meaningful information to the genome.